This video is going to touch on a number of topics so complex that they each deserve their own video, and I will be diving deeper into those in future videos, but today my goal is to simply give you an overview of what it takes to solo veteran content and provide you with tips and tricks you can start using today to instantly be better off in solo situations. Now, to be clear, when I'm talking about soloing, I'm not referring to the solo arenas like the Black Rose Prison or Vatashran Hollows, which are designed for solo play. What I'm talking about is soloing group content like veteran dungeons that are actually designed to be completed by a group of people. So if that is something that interests you, this is the video for you. First of all, let's talk about expectations. As with anything you're getting into, managing your expectations is really important, and I have to tell you that in terms of rewards, you're not gonna get a lot from soloing. You're not gonna get any exclusive titles or mounts or other cool things. So the majority of the reward that you will get from solo play is dependent on your own motivation and your own ambitions of soloing harder content or completing harder challenges. So if you're somebody who's looking to complete content to get access to sets, achievements or unlockables, you probably want to do those with a group if you want to do it the easiest way. Soloing is really just making it hard on yourself because you enjoy the challenge. Now, once you have managed your expectations when it comes to your soloing career, the next thing you need to understand before getting into any harder content is the difference between min-maxing and stat density. If you have heard of min-maxing before, it was probably in the context of group play, where damage dealers try to maximize their damage in sacrifice for everything else. So for example, a damage dealer would take an item that gives him 20% damage increase, even if it reduces his defenses by 30 or 40% maybe, just because his role in the group is solely to do damage and other group members are gonna make sure that he stays alive. So the defensive stats have way less value for the DPS, and he wants to maximize his damage even if that means minimizing his defenses. Now basically the exact opposite of that is stat density. Stat density is when you maximize the overall value of your stats, and in most cases it means that defense and offense, damage and things like healing and shielding all have very similar value to you, and you basically want to get as much of everything at the same time as you can and be kind of an all-rounder build instead of, for example, a glass cannon. And now you might already understand how in solo play stat density is much more important than min-maxing, because even if you maximize your damage, if you sacrifice your defenses in return, you don't have anybody to protect you. You don't have a tank who taunts the enemy, you don't have a healer who's going to keep you alive, and so you have to maximize your damage and your defenses at the same time if you want to be successful in solo play. So for example, a set like Draugr would very much be a min-maxing set. It increases the damage you deal, but in return it reduces the healing that you receive. A sacrifice that most DPS characters would be willing to make. When putting together a solo build, however, sacrificing 10% of your healing and gaining maybe 10% DPS increase from the added damage on Draugr is just not a good deal, when other sets can give you a similar amount of DPS increase without decreasing your defenses at all. Now, on the other hand, a good example for a set that has high stat density would be the Black Rose Prison dual wield set. As long as you stand close to an enemy and make sure your blade cloak hits them every 2 seconds, this set basically provides you 6% damage increase and also 6% damage taken reduction permanently. It also only requires 2 item slots, as it can be used on your back bar, for example, and it leaves you with a lot of space for additional item sets. Now, the third thing you will have to understand when trying to solo harder content in ESO is that when you're playing on your own, you're not gonna have any teammates with you to buff yourself or debuff the enemy. So a lot of buffs or debuffs on abilities that you would not typically use, neither as a tank nor a damage dealer, because the buffs would be provided by other teammates, are actually becoming viable if you play on your own. For example, Major Breach is probably the most important debuff you can have in any solo build, as it reduces the enemy's armor by a solid 6k, usually leading to a damage increase of 9% or above. And the only reason you're typically not using this on a damage dealing build is because the tank would already be applying major breach to all of the enemies, and since you can't apply the same named debuff twice to an enemy, your major breach would simply be wasted. But when you are playing on your own, you want to make sure you get the most value possible out of these buffs and debuffs. I'll throw some examples of skills on your screen right now that any class can access and that can be really powerful in solo situations due to the buffs and debuffs that they provide. Coming up on number 4 of the list, we have build testing. Putting together a build in the calculator is usually the first step when creating a build from scratch. Of course, you can always copy builds that other people like me are using, but for soloing specifically, I find that there are not that many builds out there that actually perform really well in harder encounters like veteran DLC dungeons. If you're looking for those kind of builds, definitely stay tuned on my channel for future build videos. But if you're trying to come up with a build yourself, after putting it together in the build calculator, always make sure to test it in game and make sure that the interactions actually work the way that you would think they would before putting any additional effort into the build calculator. For example, if you're using certain item sets like Deadly Strike or Night Slayer or something weird like that, the numbers might not actually show up in the UESP calculator, even though it's a very good and detailed program, but some things are just not visible just from looking at those stats on a paper, and you always want to make sure that you try out your ideas, not only in actual content while soloing dungeons, but also you can save yourself a lot of time by doing it on test dummies. When you're using test dummies, the specific advice here is to not use the trial dummy, because the trial dummy is giving you a lot of buffs and applying a lot of debuffs to the trial dummy, which you would usually have access to in group play. But since you're intending on making a solo build, better use one of the standard dummies, because they won't give you any additional buffs or apply any debuffs that your build can't actually apply, and testing out a solo build on a trial dummy is just going to result in wildly unrealistic numbers. Also make sure that the standard dummy you're using does have the 18,600 armor, just like any veteran dungeon boss. It will say so within the actual item description if it does. And coming to the 5th and final thing I want to talk about in today's video, which is maximizing your self-healing without losing out on too much damage. One of the easiest ways to achieve this is to use abilities or item sets that heal you based upon the damage you deal, and I will throw some examples of that on your screen right now. But if your build does not revolve around one of these things, then you really want to make sure you're using strong self-healing, preferably healing that heals you over time without requiring you to recast it too often, as in harder solo content situations you will rarely find the time to spam your self-heal 3 times just to stay alive when you have mobs piling up at the same moment, and you need to get rid of the mobs but also heal yourself at the same time. So you require some sort of healing that continues its effect while you're dealing damage. And that has been it for today's guide on how to solo. If you can implement just some of the tips in this video, I'm sure that you will get better at soloing in no time. If you have any questions related to soloing, or you have your own opinion on the things which I mentioned in this video, make sure to write a comment down below. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for future solo related content and build videos.